In the middle of the square, she was surrounded by looks of contempt, until a warrior approached, made an unexpected gesture, and silenced all hostility. Subscribe to the channel and discover how that moment became an eternal symbol of respect and protection. The heat punished Juazeiro do Norte on that market afternoon. The dust raised by passers-by mingled with the smell of spices and ripe fruits, while Raquel adjusted little Joaquim in her arms. The 7-hour walk from her small farm in Barbala had exhausted her strength, but she needed to sell the bobbin lace she produced during the early mornings to support herself and her 4-month-old son. The baby, uncomfortable with the heat, and the crowd began to cry desperately. Raquel looked around, searching for a more private place, but the square was filled with colorful stalls. Her legs trembled with fatigue when she finally found a worn wooden bench under the sparse shade of a Juazeiro tree. Little Joaquim's crying intensified, echoing among the loud conversations of the merchants. With no alternative, Raquel adjusted her cotton blouse and began to breastfeed her son right there, with the silent dignity of one fulfilling a sacred duty. It was then that the stares began to converge on her. First came the whispers, then the expressions of disapproval until some voices rose. "What kind of shamelessness is this in the middle of the square?" said a lady in a printed dress, making the sign of the cross. "This is not something to do. Stay in front of everyone, girl," reprimanded a middle-aged merchant, while others shook their heads in disapproval. Raquel felt her face burn. Since Jeremias, her husband, had departed during the last flood of the Salgado River, she had faced alone the difficulties of raising a child in the backlands, afflicted by poverty. She lowered her eyes but did not interrupt the breastfeeding. Joaquim needed to eat. "Look at that, Jeremias' widow exposing herself like this," commented a voice louder than the others. "Doesn't she have any shame?" The words cut like knives from across the square, leaning against a tree and protected by the shade of a leather hat. Severino observed the scene with attentive eyes. A respected cowboy from the outskirts of Crato, he rarely came to the big town except to buy supplies and tools. Severino was not a man of many words, but something in that scene deeply bothered him. He adjusted the leather jacket over his shoulders and walked slowly between the stalls, his tall, thin body standing out in the crowd. "It's almost as if she's trying to attract men's attention," said a middle-aged woman to another, loud enough for everyone to hear. Raquel tried to ignore it, but silent tears began to roll down her dusty face. That's when she felt a shadow over her. Severino had stopped beside her. Without saying a word, he removed the colorful cotton cloth he carried tied around his waist, a typical northeastern cowboy garment, and carefully extended it over her shoulders, creating partial protection without interrupting the breastfeeding. His gesture was precise and respectful. Then, with a firm voice that didn't need to be raised to be heard, Severino spoke. "This boy isn't sucking shame. He's sucking life." The silence that followed was as dense as the fog that covered the Araripe mountains on winter mornings. No one dared to retort. Severino remained standing like a sentinel, while Raquel finished feeding her son. When the baby fell asleep, satisfied, he asked, "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Raquel shook her head. "I was going to return to Barbalha after the market, but I sold almost nothing." He looked at the small bag where she kept the delicate lace. "I know Donna Josefa, the midwife. She lives nearby. She receives mothers who come from far away." Raquel hesitated, but when Severino offered to carry her bag of lace, she accepted, with a timid nod. They walked in silence through the dirt streets, feeling the gazes that followed them. Donna Josefa lived in a simple mud house with a wide yard where she cultivated medicinal herbs. When she saw them arriving, the white-haired lady with time-marked skin asked no questions. She simply opened the door and prepared a cool corner for Raquel and the baby. "Tomorrow you'll return to the market with renewed strength, my child," said Josefa, serving a hot pumpkin broth with milk. Meanwhile, in town, the buzz grew. Father Antonio, upon learning of the incident, mentioned during the novena that mothers are sacred in any circumstance, but the merchant Sewinazio, owner of the largest warehouse in the region, declared that the town's morality needed to be preserved. At night, when Raquel finally fell asleep on the mat Donna Josefa had offered her, the clear, starry sky gave no indication of the drought that was approaching. The Araripe, imposing in the distance, kept its secrets, while in the houses and taverns of the town, Raquel's name circulated amid heated conversations, becoming an involuntary symbol of a division that already existed but was now coming to the surface. Severino, in turn, returned to his ranch on the outskirts of Crato, carrying with him the image of that brave mother and the feeling that something important had been planted that day, like a seed waiting for the right rain to sprout. 3 days had passed since the incident at the market. Raquel remained at Dona Josefa's house, helping with chores and learning about the medicinal herbs that the midwife cultivated with such care. The news spread freely through Juazeiro do Norte and surroundings. The widow from Barbalha, who exposed herself in the square, was now under the protection of the most respected healer in the region. That morning, while sifting corn in the yard, Raquel felt the weight of the gazes from neighbors passing by on the beaten dirt path. Some nodded discreetly, others averted their eyes as if she carried some contagious disease. "Don't pay attention, my child," said Dona Josefa, noticing her discomfort. "There are people who live by judging others because they don't have the courage to look within themselves." Little Joaquim slept peacefully in an improvised hammock, oblivious to the turbulence his innocent hunger had provoked. The rain, which everyone anxiously awaited at that time of year, showed no signs. The sky remained painfully blue, without a single cloud on the horizon. The elders were already commenting, worried, that this year would bring a fierce drought. At Seu Inacio's warehouse, a group of men discussed heatedly. "It's not a question of being against children, it's a matter of decency," argued the merchant, pounding his fist on the table. "And now this woman is there at Josefa's house as if she were some saint." Jose Benavides, teacher at the town's only school, tried to calm things down. "But where is the harm in feeding a child? In all cultures, since ancient times," he was interrupted by Seu Inacio. "Don't come to me with your book stories, Professor. We're talking about the morality of our town. If we allow this today, tomorrow we'll have other libertine behaviors." Outside, Father Antonio listened in silence without intervening. His position was delicate. As a representative of the church, he should defend morality, but as a man who knew the suffering of the Backlands people, he understood Raquel's situation. Meanwhile, at the Boy Manso farm, Severino tended to the cattle with the silent efficiency that characterized him. The boss, Colonel Damasceno, approached on his chestnut horse. "They're saying in town that you defended that girl who was breastfeeding in public," he commented with a half-smile. Severino continued his work, responding without raising his eyes. "I defended a mother feeding her child, boss." The colonel studied his cowboy for a few moments. "Be careful, Severino. Seu Inacio has a lot of influence and is furious. He said he will boycott anyone who supports that shameless woman." Severino finally looked at his boss. "And you, sir, what do you think of all this?" Colonel Damasceno sighed, looking at the dry horizon. "I think there are many people worried about a woman's breast while the sky sends no water. People have strange priorities." That afternoon, Raquel decided to go to the market again. She needed to sell her laces to avoid continuing to depend on Dona Josefa's kindness. She placed Joaquim in a makeshift sling with a piece of cloth, covered her head with a scarf and left, determined despite the fear she felt. In the square, the movement was less than usual. The absence of rain was already beginning to affect commerce. Some people recognized her immediately and whispered among themselves. Raquel set up her small space, spreading the delicate laces on a cloth on the ground. A young woman approached, admiring the work. "They're beautiful. Did you make them?" Raquel nodded with a shy smile. The girl chose a piece, but before she could pay, a lady pulled her by the arm. "Don't buy anything from this woman, Christina. She has no morals." The young woman hesitated, clearly embarrassed, and moved away without completing the purchase. The hours dragged on without Raquel selling a single piece. Joaquim began to get restless, and she knew he would soon be hungry. A knot formed in her throat as she thought about what would happen when she needed to breastfeed him again in public. That's when she noticed a different movement. Severino was approaching, accompanied by 2 older women. "This is Raquel, who makes the best lace in the region." he introduced her, with his deep and calm voice. The women were wives of cowboys from the Boy Manso farm and examined the pieces with genuine interest. "My daughter is getting married next month, God willing, and if it rains," said one of them, "I want to order lace for her dress." The other also placed an order, paying in advance. Other people began to approach, curious. Severino's presence, respected for his honesty and hard work, seemed to give Raquel a kind of silent protection. When Joaquim began to cry, announcing his hunger, Raquel felt panic growing. Severino noticed and, without fanfare, positioned himself to create a barrier between her and the more curious onlookers. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Your son needs to eat." With trembling hands, Raquel adjusted the baby to breastfeed, while the women who had bought her laces remained nearby, forming a protective circle. Even so, it wasn't long before Seu Ignacio appeared, his imposing figure crossing the square with determined steps. "So it's true that you came back to provoke more scandal," he said, loud enough to attract attention. Before Severino could intervene, a firm voice sounded behind Seu Ignacio. "The only scandal I see here is a grown man persecuting a mother feeding her child." It was Donna Josefa, who rarely left home, but who was now there with her herbs tied at her waist and a defiant look. "Don't get involved in this, Josefa," warned Ignacio. "You're already creating enough problems by sheltering this woman." Donna Josefa stepped forward. "This woman has a name, Ignacio. It's Raquel, and the baby is Joaquim, grandson of the late Zé Teixeira, who helped build the first church in this town. Blood of our blood." A small circle was already forming around them. The air seemed electrified. At that very moment, in the distance on the Ararai Mountains, a different wind began to blow, swaying the leaves dried by the long period without rain. Perhaps it was just another passing gust. Perhaps it was the harbinger of changes, like those that slowly and almost imperceptibly were beginning to take shape in the heart of little Juazeiro do Norte. A week had passed since the confrontation at the market, and tension grew along with the relentless heat. The drought, which before was just a threat, now settled in a cruel manner. The sky remained mercilessly blue without clouds, while the Salgado River visibly decreased each day. The elders were already comparing that period to the terrible year 567, when many families had to leave their lands. At Donna Josefa's house, Raquel was packing her few belongings. The laces were carefully folded in the cloth bag, along with improvised diapers for Joaquim. "You don't need to go, my child," insisted the midwife, observing the precise movements of the young mother. "This will pass." Raquel shook her head. "You've already done so much for me, Donna Josefa. I don't want to bring more problems." The night before, stones had been thrown at the midwife's window, and a threatening note appeared under the door. "Send the shameless woman away, or the consequences will be worse." Little Joaquim, now almost 5 months old, observed everything, with his curious eyes, not understanding the weight his existence represented in that divided community. Outside, on the main street, an extraordinary meeting was taking place at the town hall. Seu Ignacio had summoned the merchants and landowners to discuss what he called the moral problem of the town. As if the approaching drought weren't enough, now we have to deal with this affront to good customs, he argued, gesturing emphatically. Colonel Damasceno, seated at the back, remained silent, just observing. Father Antonio tried to mediate. "We need to have charity, brothers. A mother and her child," but his voice was often drowned out by murmurs of agreement with Seu Ignacio. At the end of the meeting, a decision was made. Raquel would have 7 days to leave Juazeiro do Norte, or adapt to the decency norms of the community, which meant, in Seu Ignacio's words, feeding the child indoors as God commands. A document was drafted and signed by 12 of the 15 present. Among those who refused were Colonel Damasceno, Professor José Benavides, and surprisingly, young Mateus, son of Seu Ignacio, who had recently returned from the capital where he studied medicine. Severino was not present at the meeting. His position as a cowboy did not give him that right, but news traveled fast. When he learned of the decision, he mounted his horse and galloped to the Boy Manso farm. He found Colonel Damasceno sitting on the porch, contemplating the dry horizon. "Boss, I need your permission to use the old foreman's house," he said, without preamble. The colonel studied his cowboy for a few moments. "The one at the foot of the mountains. It's been empty for years, Severino. Why?" "For the girl from Barbalia and her son. They can't stay in town." The colonel exhaled a puff of smoke from his pipe. "You know what you're getting into, don't you? Seu Ignacio will consider this a personal affront." Severino maintained a steady gaze. "I know, boss, but I can't stand by watching such an injustice." After a long silence, the colonel nodded. "The house is yours for now, but don't say it was my idea." Meanwhile, at the market, a different tension was setting in. The women commented in low voices about the ultimatum given to Raquel, and divergent opinions began to emerge. But if breastfeeding is so indecent, why is the Holy Virgin Mary depicted giving her breast to the baby Jesus? "Turns so many images?" questioned a young Sunday school teacher, provoking surprised looks. In another corner, an older lady commented, "In my time, nobody made such a fuss about a bare breast. We worked in the fields and fed our children wherever they were hungry. The drought intensified everything: emotions, conflicts, basic needs." That afternoon, when Severino arrived at Donna Josefa's house to offer shelter to Raquel, he found the midwife alone with a worried expression. "She left at dawn, my son. Said she would return to Barbalha." Severino felt a tightness in his chest. The road to Barbalha was long and dangerous, especially for a woman alone with a baby, and even more so in times of drought, when hunger made men desperate. Without thinking, twice, he mounted his horse and set off in search of Raquel. The sun was beginning to set when he finally spotted her, walking slowly along the dusty road, with Joaquim tied to her body. She looked exhausted, but maintained the dignified posture that characterized her. "Raquel," he called, approaching. She turned, surprised, her red eyes revealing contained tears. "Why did you leave without saying goodbye?" asked Severino, dismounting from his horse. "I didn't want to cause more problems," she replied, adjusting the sleeping baby, oblivious to everything. "You don't cause problems. It's them who can't see beyond their own noses." Severino explained, "About the house on the Boy Manso farm, how it would be safe for her and her son, away from the town's gazes and judgments." Raquel hesitated. "Why are you doing this for me, Severino? We barely know each other." He remained silent for a few moments, as if searching for the right words, something rare for a man of few words. "Because it's the right thing to do," he responded simply. "And because I remembered my mother, who raised 6 children alone after my father was gone. She fed the youngest while working in the fields, with the sun burning her back. No one ever helped her." Back in town, an unexpected movement was beginning to take shape. Donna Josefa, after Raquel's departure, decided she could no longer remain silent. With the authority that her 70 years of service to the community conferred upon her, she went from house to house, speaking with the women. "It's time to think about what really matters," she would say. "The rain doesn't come. The river is drying up, and we're fighting because of a mother's breastfeeding her child. What kind of priority is that?" Her words met resistance in some houses, but in others, especially among younger mothers, they resonated strongly. Mateus, Seu Ignacio's son, joined her, speaking about the benefits of breastfeeding he had learned in medical school. "In times of drought, breast milk can be the difference between life and death for a baby," he explained, openly challenging his father's position. At night, in the small chapel of Our Lady of Sorrows, Father Antonio announced a special novena to pray for rain, inviting the entire community. "In times of trial, we need to be united, not divided," he said, with a meaningful look at Seu Ignacio, who watched from the front row. The tension was palpable, like the dry air that announced a storm, but without bringing the promise of rain. In the old foreman's house, at the foot of the Araripe Mountains, Raquel settled Joaquim in a small hammock. The construction was simple but solid, with thick walls that kept the interior cool even on the hottest days. Severino had provided fresh water and some basic supplies. "Tomorrow I'll bring more things," he promised, already at the door. "And my laces? How will I sell them?" asked Raquel, concerned about making a living. "Leave it to me. The cowboys' wives are already interested in ordering more pieces." When Severino was about to leave, Raquel called him. "Severino." He turned. "Thank you for everything." He just nodded, his face illuminated by the last ray of sunlight of that day. On the horizon, over the arrow-ripe mountains, a small cloud was beginning to form, almost imperceptible against the darkening sky. Perhaps it was just an empty promise, like so many others in times of drought. Or perhaps it was the first sign that something was about to change, both in the sky and in the hardened hearts of Juazeiro do Norte. The 6th day after the ultimatum dawned with a different light. Sparse clouds dotted the sky, bringing a timid hope to the punished backlands. In the house at the foot of the mountains, Raquel observed the horizon while breastfeeding Joaquim. Her hands, calloused from constant work with lace, caressed her son's dark hair. In recent days, her small space had been transformed into an unexpected meeting point. First came the cowboys' wives with lace orders and stories to share. Then some young mothers from town, brought discreetly by Mateus, Seu Inácio's son, to learn about breastfeeding and baby care. "You have a gift," one of them told her, observing how Raquel positioned her son naturally. "It's not a gift, it's necessity," she replied with a serene smile. "When you're a mother alone, you learn quickly." In town, preparations for the special novena mobilized everyone. Father Antonio had decided to hold the celebration in the central square, not inside the church, so that the entire community could participate. "In times of drought, we need all possible prayers," he justified, when questioned by Seu Inácio about this unorthodox decision. The merchant, in turn, remained inflexible. "Tomorrow the deadline expires, and if that woman doesn't leave the region or behave decently, I will take measures," he declared, during a meeting with his allies. What he didn't know was that his own son, Mateus, was arranging a special participation in the novena. Together with Dona Josefa, the young doctor had spoken with the priest about the importance of addressing the theme of motherhood during the celebration. If we are asking for life, which is what rain represents, why not also celebrate the closest source of life we have, he argued. The priest, initially hesitant, eventually agreed. At the ranch where Severino lived, the cowboy was preparing for a confrontation that seemed inevitable. He knew well Seu Inácio's determination and knew that the merchant would not let the matter die easily. "You need to be careful," warned Colonel Damasceno, who had visited him that morning. "Inácio is talking about keeping you away from the market, preventing you from selling cheese and other products from the farm." Severino nodded, showing no concern. "If necessary, boss, I can leave the job. I won't abandon Raquel and the boy." The few. Colonel observed his cowboy with an enigmatic expression. "It won't be necessary. I have plans for tomorrow." When night came, an unusual agitation took over Juazeiro do Norte. People from all corners of the town and surroundings began to gather in the central square for the novena. Improvised lanterns and candles illuminated the space, creating an almost magical scenario. The altar was set up under the same Juazeiro tree where, weeks before, Raquel had been humiliated for breastfeeding her son. Dona Josefa arrived early, bringing with her aromatic herbs that, according to tradition, attracted rain when burned. Professor José Benavides organized the school children for a special presentation. Even Colonel Damasceno attended, something rare since he was not a man to frequent religious events. In her house at the foot of the mountains, Raquel heard the church bell in the distance. Severino had told her about the novena and invited her to participate, but she refused. "I'm not ready to face all of them at once," she explained. However, while cradling Joaquim, a restlessness grew in her chest. Something told her she should be present. When the baby finally fell asleep, she made a decision. She adjusted her son in the sling, covered her head with a scarf, and began walking toward town, guided by the lights that intensified in the square. The novena had already begun when she arrived. She hid in the shadows on the periphery of the square, observing the crowd that prayed fervently. Father Antonio led the prayers with renewed energy, speaking about the importance of unity in difficult times. That's when the unexpected happened. After the fifth mystery, the priest made a gesture and Mateus climbed onto the small improvised platform. "My brothers and sisters," began the young doctor, his clear voice cutting through the night, "we are here asking God for the miracle of rain of life that descends from the heavens to nourish our land. But we often forget to honor the life that already exists among us." A murmur ran through the crowd. Seu Inácio, in the center of the square, visibly stiffened. "As a doctor, I learned that breast milk is the first miracle we experience in this world. It is food, it is protection, it is love in its purest form." As Mateus spoke, Dona Josefa lit a small brazier with her herbs, releasing an aromatic smoke that spread throughout the square. In times of drought, when food becomes scarce and water becomes precious, the mother's body continues producing this perfect food for her child. Isn't that a miracle as great as the rain we ask for today? Raquel, still in the shadows, felt tears streaming down her face. Joaquim woke up at that moment, stirring in the sling. Before she could calm him, the baby began to cry, his sound echoing in the night. All eyes turned in the direction of the crying. There was a moment of absolute silence, broken only by Joaquim's sobs. It was then that Colonel Damasceno, to everyone's surprise, walked to where Raquel was and extended his hand to her. "Come, my daughter. Your place is here with us." Hesitantly, Raquel took a few steps forward, entering the circle of light. Joaquim's crying intensified. Instinctively, she began to open her blouse to breastfeed him, but stopped, looking around, remembering the judgments. "Feed your son, Raquel," said Dona Josefa, approaching. "No one here will judge you for this." Seu Inácio stepped forward, his expression hard. "This is an affront, a deliberate provocation." But before he could continue, a voice interrupted him. "Father, enough." It was Mateus, who was now beside Raquel. "Are you more concerned with a mother's breast than with the hunger of our people? Is this the morality you defend?" A heavy silence fell over the square. Joaquim cried louder and louder, his desperation cutting through the night like a knife. That's when Severino, who had been observing everything from afar, approached. Without saying a word, he removed his simple jacket and extended it over Raquel's shoulders, creating a discreet shelter. "He's hungry," he said simply, "and hunger waits for neither morality nor opinion." The gesture, so similar to what he had done on the first day, caused a murmur in the crowd. Raquel, protected by Severino's jacket, began to breastfeed Joaquim, who immediately calmed down. It was at that exact moment that the first drop fell. Then another and another, until a sudden downpour began to pour over Juazeiro do Norte. People looked at the sky, incredulous, feeling the fresh water on their faces. Some began to cry, others to laugh, while the rain, so awaited, finally arrived. "It's a miracle," someone shouted. "Our Lady has answered our prayers," exclaimed another voice. Amid the joyful confusion, Seu Inácio remained motionless, water running down his face. His son Mateus approached, extending his hand. "Father, you always taught me that a man must recognize when he is wrong." For a long moment, the merchant did not move. Then slowly, he shook his son's hand. Perhaps I have let myself be carried away by old traditions," he murmured, almost inaudible under the sound of the rain. 3 months later, the small town had transformed. The rain that night was not an isolated event, but the beginning of a period of abundant waters that reinvigorated the backlands. In the old schoolmaster's house, now renovated with the help of the community, operated the Backlands Mother Space, a place where women could breastfeed their children, receive guidance from Mateus and Dona Josefa, and learn crafts like the bobbin lace that Raquel taught. The idea came from Seu Inácio himself, who, in an attempt at reparation, donated the property and part of the materials for the renovation. "It doesn't erase what I did," he told Raquel, "when the space was inaugurated, but perhaps it will help other mothers not to go through what you went through." Raquel and Joaquim continued living in the house at the foot of the mountains, now with a small garden flourishing in front, thanks to the generous rains. Severino visited them regularly, bringing fresh milk and stories of working with the cattle. Gradually, an unconventional family was forming, united not by blood ties but by something equally strong, mutual respect and care. On a particularly beautiful afternoon, with the sun setting behind the Araripe Mountains, Raquel watched Joaquim, now almost 9 months old, crawling in the yard under Severino's watchful eye. "He's going to be quite a cowboy," commented the man with a rare smile. "Or a lace-maker like his mother," she replied, also smiling. "The important thing is that he grows up knowing that nourishing life should never be a cause for shame." Severino nodded, his eyes meeting hers. Words were not necessary between them, they never had been. What they had built went beyond language. It was a deep understanding born from a moment of shared courage. In town, the Backlands Mother space was becoming a reference for neighboring communities. Women from Crato, Barbalia, and even from Misonvelia came to learn about the initiative. Professor José Benavides documented everything, writing about how a simple change in perspective had transformed the lives of so many people. Perhaps, he wrote in his diary, "The greatest droughts are not those of the land, but those of the human heart. And just as rain can reverse the first, compassion can heal the second." Meanwhile, in the central square, under the same huasero tree that had witnessed so many decisive moments, children played freely. Among them, some mothers breastfed their babies without fear, talking and laughing. Life followed its course, renewed not only by the rain that had fallen from the skies, but by the courage of a woman who was not afraid to feed her son, and by the strength of a man who understood that protecting life is the most sacred of duties. If you were moved by this journey through the Brazilian backlands, where the act of breastfeeding became a symbol of resistance and unity, leave your like and share your impressions in the comments. Your story of overcoming can also inspire many other people who face unfair judgments. Subscribe to the channel for more narratives that celebrate the strength of Brazilian tradition.